Welcome back to the series about CS basics with Python. In this lecture, as we discussed in one of the previous lessons, we want to focus on what the terminal is, or a command line interface, or PowerShell as it is called with Windows, for example. In order to understand a little bit more about the ls command, we can do a man search, and a man search just opens man pages, the manual pages of that specific command. So let's do man ls here, and then we can get a explanation and some information about the command here. And this is Linux and macOS specific. Windows users might have a different way. I'm not really sure about that, but in the worst case, just Google it and you'll find the same explanations. So we can pass it some options with a dash, and here you can see all the options we can pass. So for example, let's use the -a in order to include directory entries with a dot. So we also want to list hidden files. And also, let me scroll down here. Let's use the L format, which will list the entries in long format. Okay, so let's do -al. And here we can now see that we have different files in our folder as we had before with the 3 visible ones. What we see here is we see a dot, a .ds store file, and a .ds store file is Mac specific, so you might won't have that on your system, and a VS Code configurations folder, and of course all the 3 other files. Dot is the link to our current directory, which is not really needed. The .dot file, or the .dot folder here, which is, as you can see, it's highlighted in blue, which is going to be a directory. Links to the current folder. So what we can do is we can do cd and .dot, which will go back one folder. Okay, so let's go back to our terminal folder with change directory and observe this a little bit more. What we can do here is we can see the access rights of different users of our system and some other stuff. This is not important for now. We can see the creation date and the size of that specific file, and also which user it belongs to. So what we can do with this information is we can, for example, use another command called cat, and cat will just list the content of that file in the terminal. So let's do a cat on our hello.txt file, and here we can see it prints hello world to the console, or not it prints, but it lists, because if we look into that specific file, hello.txt, let me open it in the graphic user interface, we can see it's very small, but here we can see that it's hello world. We can do the same for the Python file. Okay, so it doesn't matter which kind of file it is, as long as there is text in it. We can also do it with images actually, but it's not really helpful. As long as there is text in it, it might be useful to do a cat on it. So keep on remember that. If we see a folder in our system, we can always cd, if we have the rights to, of course, we can cd into that folder. So let me check that out. But before I do that, let me show you one more thing with ls. We can also list the content of a given folder. So let's do the check me out folder, and here we can see that there is another txt file in there. What we can now do is, before we cd into it, we can use cat again and use that relative path of that folder. So our current directory plus the relative path will give an absolute path, and in here we can use current folder we want to check out and the file in it. I'll do tab again to get the auto-completion, and then execute it, and then we can see the folder of that specific file. So what is happening here is that we actually give it this relative path, so the path from the current folder, which is the same as using this. So // is going to be used in order to show the path to a folder, a relative path, and then we can see check me out and then the checkout file. So let me cd into that folder, cd check me out, and then I can list the content again with ls, and here we can see that there is a file in there, hello.txt, and here we can see there's the same file in it. So again, this is just an abstraction of the command line interface. The folders are visual representations of the content of our hard drive, and then we can navigate with cd like we do when clicking the arrows, and we can of course read files with, not read files, but list files with cat, and also list the content of a directory. The next commands we want to look at is deletion and creation of either folders or files. So what we can do here, of course, in our graphical user interface is we can just rename or delete and duplicate files. We can also do that, of course, in the terminal, because again, the graphical user interface is just an abstraction over the terminal. And so let's, for example, create a new file. So what we can do is we can touch a new file, and this just creates a new file without any other concerns. So let's do test.txt here. And if we hit enter, we can see that the file is instantly created on our system, and we can instantly see it in our graphical user interface. With the command rm, remove, we can then delete that file again. So we can create and delete new files. Another thing is that we can either edit or create new files if it's not already there with a command called nano. And nano will open a terminal text editor. I'll show you how it works. Let's create a new test.txt file, and we can now see that we're in some different mask. We're in some different kind of terminal environment in which we can, for example, also type hello world. And this is the School of Automation. So in order to save that, I'll hit Control and O, and here we can now see that it will save the file to the given name. Let's do test.txt. I'll hit enter, and now I can exit that terminal text editor with Control and X. And now we can see again that the file has been created in our graphic user interface. And if we double click it, then we can see that there is text in it. Let me again make that a little bit bigger. I'll just edit that. Here you can see that this is the text we wrote in Nano itself. If we now do Nano again and do test.txt, we can again see that content in the file. Let's do Control and X again. And if we do touch test.txt, like the command before, where we just create a new file without editing it, and now we check out the content of our file with the cat command we used before. Hopefully you remember that it shows us the content of the file in our terminal. We can see that it's still there, so it's not overriding what already exists. If we list the content again, we can see that there also has not been created a second test.txt file. Those are really the very basic commands that you might want to know and might want to see before going and starting with Python and run commands in the Python terminal. Even though Visual Studio Code gives you this terminal, this inbuilt terminal where you can just use the graphic user interface to right click and run your Python scripts, it might make sense to know a little bit about and understand the terminal itself a little bit more. So let me clear that screen because I'm reaching the end of the console here. And you don't have to do that, but I really like to keep it a little bit cleaner because I don't want to work at the bottom of the command line interface. Let's look at one more creation and deletion element, and this time we're going to create a new folder. So let's list the content again, ls, we are still in our check me out folder, and I can use mkdir, which will make directory. So it's mk for make, dir from directory, of course, and we can give it a name. So let's do new folder. And again, we can see that it already shows up in our graphic user interface in here. And what we can do is we can double click it, of course, and go back, which would be the same as cd, change directory into our new folder, and then checking out the content and then going back with the ... folder or link on our system that is used to go back one folder. So basically it is this dot, and the next folder is like a linked list. Like, for example, think about a marble chain where you have one marble and then a little bit of chain and then another marble and then a third marble. And this is how you can stick together those paths. And a ... always represents the folder or the location before your current folder. So the element in front of you. In order to delete that folder, let's use the rm command again. And in this case, I'll just type new folder. And now we can see that there is a problem. the remove gives us an error because it tells us that new folder cannot be deleted because it is a directory. So what can we do now? This is the first time you see this abstraction of the graphic user interface, because if we right click on our folder and we do move to bin here, it works without any problem. So let me restore that with Control-C. What we have to do here is we will check out the rm command in our man pages. You remember it is used to see what the command can do, for example. And here we can see that we have a D. It will attempt to remove the directories as well as other file types. So let's try it out. rm-d and our new folder. And now we can see that it's gone. So sometimes we have to do a little bit more or put more effort into doing some things because it's more strict. It's very, very direct. It's very on point on what it should do. Remember the example where we just say do math, and it of course does not do anything because we cannot just say it do this very abstract thing. We want to give it very, very strict and small elements to do in order to understand what we want it to do. All right, so I think we know the very, very basic commands in order to traverse, so change directory on our system, and for example find our files in our terminal in order to execute them. Let's do one more thing, and let's use the terminal itself to execute our Python file instead of our Visual Studio Code environment. So I will go back and do ls again, and here you can see there are only txt files in there. So let me go back here and change directory cd again here with a ... which will link to the folder before, and then we can see that we're in the terminal folder again, just like we are here. And if we do ls again, we can see that our Python file is in here. And now we can do Python, which will use the Python executable that has been linked, if you saw the installation video, in the path variable. We will look at that in another video on environments. And here we can just type, maybe use the auto-completion to do that, or just type it in here, hello.py. And if we execute it, we can see that we get hello world printed to the console. For example, if we try to execute the hello.txt file, we can see that there is a problem. We can see an error, which is called a syntax error, because the file txt does not contain any Python commands or any Python scripting or any Python code. It just contains pure text, and this is not valid in the world of Python, or most likely any other programming language. So you can see that it is invalid syntax, and it gives us an indication where the problem might be. But this is only important in the next section, where we can then see, for example, indentation errors, which is something that Python really looks for in order to separate the code and check your code for structure. Let's do one last clear here, and that's basically it. So I've shown you the pip command in the previous lesson about installing dependencies, and other than that, I think we will cover more commands as we go through this series. But in order to really start out your coding adventure or your coding journey, whatever, is knowing the basics and then going and building from there. Make sure to use the terminal and not use the Visual Studio Code execution, because of course it teaches you how to use it. It gives you more skill. It helps you understand and get familiar with the terminal itself instead of just using the graphic user interface all the time. This concludes this terminal lesson and CLI lesson for now. As I said, we will cover more of that in the future, but for now I think you're all set up, and well, I hope I'll see you around, and make sure to check out the next lessons and subscribe to this channel to not miss any of them. As I've mentioned before, I will add different tasks in the description of this video. I will give you some examples on what you can do, and then you should already be familiar with the basic commands. Of course, you can also read through more of the commands and help yourself to understand a little bit better, find out more commands, more helpful things, and things you can use later on in order to understand everything a little bit better.